Hey, Internet pals. Back with episode 2 of Johnny and the Stash. I can't do this alone, though, so without further ado, here's Johnny.
Hey folks, it's good to be back. We had a lot of fun with our first video. Unfortunately, episode 2 has taken a while. If you're wondering why it's taken a while, I'm going to turn that over to Parker, who's been kind of distracted lately.
Yeah, John. So we decided to move across the country. If you look at this map, my girlfriend and I took quite the trek, almost 3,000 miles, to drive out to live with some family in Virginia, get a change of scenery, and have a new lifestyle. We decided that living in California, especially among the COVID months, has just not been worth it with the crazy rent and whatnot. So we decided to take a leap and live differently. We also brought along our lizard, which you can see there perched on her little hammock in the window. And I would say, not many people get to drive across the states, but I don't think many lizards have gotten to see that view driving all the way over. So it was pretty fun, and we did sleep in the truck that we drove. So that was kind of an adventure, sleeping in campgrounds and the city, and it was pretty fun. So that's what I've been up to.
Well, I want to welcome Parker to the East Coast. I am not sure how the East Coast is going to go for the mustache, the surfer dude hair.
Oh, yeah.
Or the whole desert lizard thing. But Parker, we'd expect nothing less from you. I see that you brought along a little thing behind you. You also brought along your infamous 3D printer. So
Yeah.
Tell me, now that it's on the East Coast, what's the next 3D printing project?
Well, once I get it back up and running, I'm thinking of making a replica of my mustache for my girlfriend.
I can't even go there. Can't even go there. Well, Parker, with that being said, let's get on with our production. So, for those of you who watched our first episode, our biggest message was don't get Macaulay'd. You should never have a surprise with your cloud bill. In 5 minutes a week, if you do things right, you won't get Macaulay'd.
That's right, John. And at the end of episode 2, we talked about how that it's good to be able to be ready for the monthly invoice to come, but management really wants to make sure that you're driving down the cost wherever possible. So what's the next step here?
So we really liked this picture. I think during COVID, we can all relate to maybe not having your hair sheared quite as much as you would like to. And then of course you got Parker there with the whole surfer dude thing going on. But when you talk about shearing, sometimes you got to shear pretty often to keep things properly trimmed. And the same is true with your cloud costs. The bottom line is that most people think of cost optimization as something they do once or twice a year. And it's important that you start to change that way of thinking, maybe get sheared a little more often. So if, in fact, you are doing things just annually or semi-annually, you're leaving a lot of opportunity on the table. You want to ensure that you're driving down costs at all times.
So where's the first place that you look? Well, you got to go looking for zombies. Zombie resources. That's the first concept that we want to introduce here. Another way to look at it is kind of like your dirty dishes in the sink. And if you've ever lived with anybody else, you've probably had this exact situation in your kitchen one time or another. And it's monumental. And it's easy to just say, I'll deal with it later. And that's when your invoice gets inflated at the end of the month and you weren't expecting that dollar amount. Zombie resources, especially in AWS as an example here, can look like this. You got unattached or available EBS volumes. You've got elastic IPs that are disassociated from instances or resources. And then you have the snapshots of the entire workload. And in this example below shows that these snapshots are just continually piling up without having any type of a retention policy to go in and clean them up after they've become, a couple weeks old. And in a couple of cases, we've seen companies where they just don't have the time or the forethought to think about these kinds of things that just get left lying around, debris in the virtual data center. In a physical space, you'd see a cord on the ground or sticking out from a server and pick it up because it's in the way. But in the digital space, it's easy to let it get out of control.
After you've cleaned up the obvious waste, you've got to think about right sizing of your infrastructure. In this picture, you can see one fish is in a bowl that might be a little bit too big for him. One fish is in a bowl that's way too small for him. The whole point of the cloud is you should be able to size your infrastructure for just what you need and ultimately just pay for what you need. So one thing you have to be careful about is bringing that on-prem mentality where you've gone off and you bought a whole bunch of equipment, so you have to use it up, so you normally over provision. Well, in the cloud, if you over provision, you're wasting money. So in the Cloud Health tool, they give you a way to look at this. And this is probably available in other tools too. But what's neat about Cloud Health is you can do it based on what they call perspectives, which are views of the data. So you can look at your right sizing, see recommendations, for instance, maybe by owner or group. And you can drill into Anton and say, what does Anton have going on? And you know what, Anton, there's some serious downgrades that might be available. Now, this is just a tool to give you ideas. There may be very good reasons for why you have it, but at least you have something to give you a sense as to what to look at.
So we've talked about a couple of different things to cut once or twice a week or a month, right size those instances, pick up the debris, take out the trash. But are you ready to make a commitment? Are you ready to say, I do to a 1 year or 3 year reservation? Well, you might not be, because it's complicated. And we know that. Everyone knows it's complicated. RIs, reserved instances, can be complex. They've got a lot of different options. Sometimes you put capital up front, sometimes you don't. What's the best practice? What are convertible RIs? What are committed use discounts in GCP? It's a lot. And it can be a lot of overhead management once you've made that commitment. And it's kind of like managing a stock portfolio, because you've got the region, you've got the operating system, the instance family, the database type, is it MySQL? Is it not? I mean, there's so many different things to pay attention to, and it's just a lot of different concepts to keep track of.
So beyond what Parker was mentioning about all the choices when you try to make a commitment or a reservation, you also have to realize that each cloud provider has many different choices for it. In Azure, as you can see on this screen, there's almost 20 different options for what you can make a commitment or a reservation on. And for all that criteria that Parker was mentioning, you have to understand how to make a purchase for each one. So if we're talking almost 20 with Azure, with Google Cloud, we're talking about 6. But Google Cloud has this thing called committed use discounts, which are different even from reservations. So you have to understand what they are. And then when you jump over to AWS, you're talking another 8 different choices that you have. And you have to be ready to make the appropriate, choose appropriate criteria for each one and make something that you can manage ongoing. It is complicated. It's very doable, and people have used them for years, but that doesn't mean it's an easy thing to do.
So with all of that in mind, AWS has really stepped up and kind of changed the game. Late last year, they introduced something called AWS Compute Savings Plans. And you might be somewhat familiar with these, but these are what we call the easy button. And it eliminates a lot of the overhead management with traditional reserved instances.
with that being said, we're going to dive into this, and we expect GCP and Azure to follow suit with many similar things. So when we dive into it, you'll learn more in episode 3 of Johnny and the Stack.